Right now, there's a plant growing within 20 feet of your front door. You've pulled it. You've sprayed it. You've cursed it on a Saturday morning. And it's the same plant Roman soldiers carried across an entire empire on purpose. Here's the question nobody asks. Why did people who had every reason to choose carefully, physicians, monks, soldiers in the field, keep going back to the same so-called weeds, generation after generation? Today, we're counting down 12 of them. 12 plants growing in your yard right now that fed armies, brewed ale, and survived 1,000 years of being called worthless. Stick around for number 5, a weed that the entire world eats except us. And number 1, the plant the Anglo-Saxons believed could call life back into dying flesh. By the end of this, you'll never look at your lawn the same way again. Let's start with 2 plants you've probably fought with bare hands, pulling, digging, cursing under your breath, and losing every single time. The first is ground elder. Botanists call it Agopodium podagraria. Gardeners call it something far less polite. It spreads underground through a web of roots so dense and so determined that pulling it out by hand barely slows it down. Today, it's considered one of the most invasive weeds in the temperate world. But here's the part most people never learn. The Romans didn't find ground elder growing wild and decide to tolerate it. They planted it deliberately, carried it north from Italy to Britain, to Germany, to every garrison settlement along the edge of their empire. They grew it next to their forts on purpose, as both food and medicine. When the empire eventually fell apart, the plant simply stayed behind. It never left. It's still spreading through gardens across Europe and North America today. Nearly 2,000 years later, completely indifferent to the fact that the people who brought it there are long gone. Young ground elder shoots, gathered before the plant flowers, taste surprisingly mild, a little like fresh carrot tops, with a faint hint of anise. The Romans treated it the way you'd treat a reliable friend, something you bring with you, plant at every stop, and never have to think twice about now. The second plant on today's list might be growing in your yard at this very moment, quietly taking over a patch of shade. Creeping Charlie, ground ivy. Some old farmers still call it alehoof. That name is the clue. Long before hops became the standard bittering agent in beer across Northern Europe, brewers used this exact plant to flavor and preserve their ale. German records confirm it was in regular use by the 10th century. For hundreds of years, anyone drinking a mug of ale in a Saxon village was tasting Creeping Charlie. Whether they realized it or not, it spreads by runners that root themselves at every single node they touch, which is exactly why it seems to come back stronger every time you spray it. It thrives in shade, in full sun, in dry soil, in clay. It does not care what kind of lawn you're trying to keep. 2 plants, both considered a nuisance today, both deliberately grown, harvested, and depended on by people who had every reason to know better. And it turns out, that pattern repeats, again and again. On this list, the next 2 plants weren't just used, they were named after exactly what they did. Sometimes the oldest knowledge isn't hidden in a manuscript somewhere. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, in the name itself. Take Prunella vulgaris. Most people walk right past it. Low to the ground, small purple flowers, easy to miss in a lawn full of taller, more aggressive growth. But its common name leaves nothing to the imagination. Self-heal. Medieval woodworkers called it carpenter's herb, because it was the first thing reached for when a tool slipped and broke skin on a job site. The Iroquois used it for sore, irritated throats, and in traditional Chinese medicine, it appears under the name Jia Kuchao, recorded in formulas going back centuries. 3 cultures, no contact with each other, the same low purple flower, growing in the same kind of disturbed, Unremarkable soil. Valued for strikingly similar reasons. What's interesting is how directly people named it, not the flower that smells nice, not the plant with the pretty bloom. Self-heal. A name that's really an instruction. Now walk a little further, past the edge of your driveway, to the cracks in the pavement where almost nothing else survives. There you'll likely find the second plant in this chapter, broadleaf plantain, Plantago major. In medieval England, healers gave it a name that wasn't poetic exaggeration. They called it the bandage of God, and they meant that literally as an instruction for what to do with it. Plantain shows up in the Leech Book of Bald, one of the oldest surviving medical texts written in English, dating back to the 9th century. There, it's recommended for wounds, for stings, for the kind of slow, festering injuries that worried people most before modern medicine existed. And the Cherokee, working in an entirely separate tradition, an ocean away, with no possible contact with Anglo-Saxon healers, arrived at the exact same plant, the exact same use. Crush a fresh plantain leaf between your fingers and you'll notice something right away. A cooling, almost soothing sensation against the skin. That's not imagination. That's a plant whose entire reputation was built one small, practical observation at a time, repeated by unrelated people, in unrelated places, across more than 1,000 years. Self-heal. Bandage of God. Names like that don't happen by accident. They happen when something works often enough, for long enough, that people stop describing it and just start naming it after the result. And the next plant on this list takes that same idea somewhere even stranger, because it doesn't just heal. It tastes like a warning shot of pure citrus, straight from your lawn. Some plants whisper. This next one practically shouts the moment it touches your tongue. Sheep sorrel, Rumex acetosella. It grows in the kind of poor, acidic soil that most gardeners consider a lost cause, which is exactly why it thrives there while everything else struggles. The leaves are small, arrow-shaped, almost prehistoric looking, and the taste is unmistakable. Sharp, sour, almost electric on the tongue, like biting into concentrated lemon. Indigenous communities across North America, particularly Algonquin nations, used sheep sorrel for digestive trouble and fevers, long before anyone had a word for what made it work. European folk tradition reached for it too, as a cooling herb for inflammation. Two continents, two completely separate traditions. The same small, sour weed. Here's what's easy to miss. That sharp, electric flavor comes from compounds, also found in some of the most expensive specialty teas in the world. In sheep sorrel, they're growing for free, in soil most people consider too poor to bother with. Now, just a few feet away, often in the cool, damp shade where sheep sorrel wouldn't survive, you'll find something that looks almost nothing like it. Despite the name, wood sorrel, Oxalis acetosella. Small, clover-shaped leaves that actually fold closed at night, as if the plant is sleeping. Many people find wood sorrel quietly beautiful. They pull it anyway. The Celts considered it sacred, drawing a direct line between its three-part leaf and ideas of trinity and balance. Irish monks, carrying medical knowledge through centuries of upheaval, included wood sorrel in their preparations for cleaning and dressing wounds. That practice didn't come from nowhere. The leaves carry a notable concentration of tannins, the same astringent quality found in strong black tea, along with a meaningful dose of vitamin C, which made wood sorrel genuinely valuable in places and seasons where citrus simply didn't exist. Taste it fresh in a salad, and you'll get a clean, cool lemon note, milder and gentler than its sour cousin down the lawn. Unlike sheep sorrel, which is best eaten sparingly, wood sorrel can be enjoyed in normal salad quantities without a second thought. Two plants. Two completely different personalities. One sharp and electric, one cool and gentle. Both dismissed as lawn weeds. Both, at different points in history, treated as something worth bending down for. And the next two plants on this list take that idea even further, because in most of the world, they were never weeds to begin with. They were dinner. Let's pause here for a second. Because this next plant isn't some obscure folk remedy from 1,000 years ago. It's dinner for roughly half the planet. Right now. Tonight, purslane, Portulaca oleracea. That low, fleshy little succulent that spreads across garden beds after a good summer rain. The one most American gardeners pull out and throw straight in the compost. In Greece, it goes into fatouche. In Turkey, it's called semizotu. Cooked down with thick yogurt. In Mexico, it's verdolagas. Braised with chili and pork until tender. Across the Middle East, people have been eating it continuously for thousands of years. Long before anyone wrote down what we now call agricultural history. The United States is one of the very few places on Earth that looks at purslane and sees nothing but a weed to eliminate. What makes it worth a second look is what's actually inside those small, glossy leaves. Purslane contains a type of omega-3 fatty acid that's far more common in fish than in plants. Most plant-based greens only offer a form your body has to convert before it's useful. Purslane skips that step entirely. And there's something else. That slightly slippery texture you notice when you chew it raw isn't a flaw. It's the plant's signature. And scientists studying it have found it genuinely interesting for reasons still being explored. Eaten raw, purslane has a pleasant saltiness and the satisfying crunch of a young cucumber, sautéed briefly with garlic, olive oil, and a little lemon. It turns silky almost instantly. The trick is speed, 2 or 3 minutes in the pan. No more. Or you lose the very texture that makes it worth cooking in the first place. Now, picture the dead of winter. Frozen ground. Most green things long gone. And there, often the only living green thing left in an entire garden, is chickweed, Stellaria media. It germinates in autumn while everything else is dying. It keeps growing under a light dusting of snow. Small white star-shaped flowers. Tinder. Water-filled stems that feel almost soapy between your fingers. In the Appalachian Mountains, people call the chickweed poultice, poor man's medicine, made simply by crushing the fresh plant. But just as remarkable is its flavor. Sweet, tender, genuinely reminiscent of the first bite of a very young ear of corn. For a plant, most people rip out without a second glance. That's a strange and welcome surprise. Two plants. One eaten by half the world, ignored by the other half. One that refuses to stop growing even when winter tries its hardest to stop it. And the next chapter takes us somewhere with much higher stakes to a plant that fights back the instant you touch it. And another that marched alongside some of the most famous armies in human history. Let's address the obvious thing first. This next plant stings, genuinely, painfully stings. Stinging nettle, Urtica dioica, covered in microscopic hollow needles that inject an irritating mixture the instant they brush against skin. The sting is immediate, real, and can linger for hours. It's an extraordinarily effective defense. Insects avoid it. Grazing animals avoid it. Most gardeners, after one bad encounter, reach straight for thick gloves and a bottle of herbicide. But here's what gets lost in that frustration. Roman soldiers, according to historical accounts, deliberately rubbed nettle leaves against aching, arthritic joints, a practice called urtication. And centuries later, during the First World War, when British cotton supplies ran desperately short, the German military turned to something unexpected. They wove nettle fibers into cloth and used that cloth for wound dressings, not because it was soft, Cotton was softer. They used it because it was strong, durable, and held up under conditions where ordinary fabric simply gave out. Heat changes everything about this plant. 30 seconds in boiling water is enough to completely neutralize the sting. What's left behind tastes like spinach, but deeper, earthier, almost mineral. With a faint trace of the sea, Italians turn it into risotto alla ortica. The Irish simmer it into a soup with potato, onion, and cream. And nutritionally, it holds more iron than spinach, along with meaningful calcium and vitamin K. Locked inside a plant most people only ever encounter as an injury waiting to happen. Now, picture a different kind of plant entirely. Feathery leaves, flat clusters of small white flowers, an aroma somewhere between wild sage and warm camphor. Yarrow, Achilles millefolium. The name alone tells you something. It comes directly from Achilles, the legendary warrior of the Iliad. According to Homer, Achilles used yarrow on his soldiers' wounds to slow the bleeding and hold off the infections that, in ancient warfare, often killed more men than the weapons themselves. The Romans called it herba militaris, the herb of soldiers, and the pattern doesn't stop with one empire. The Chinese recorded it in the Shennong Bencao Jing, one of the oldest materia medica texts in the world. The Navajo used it. The Norse used it. The Ojibwe used it. Civilizations with no contact, no shared language, no shared history, somehow arriving at the exact same flowering plant, for the exact same battlefield purpose, a plant that smells like sage and camphor, carried by soldiers across continents and centuries who had never heard of each other, and who never once doubted why they reached for it. Two plants, one that hurts you the moment you touch it, one named directly after a legendary warrior. Both, somehow, considered essential by people standing on a battlefield with nothing else to rely on. And that brings us to the final chapter, the plant nobody can kill, and the one that quietly does its work in silence. You know this plant. There's a very good chance you've pulled it out of a garden bed in frustration. More than once. Creeping Charlie, ground ivy, Glechuma hydracea. It spreads by runners along the surface of the soil, rooting itself at every single point it touches. It grows in shade. It grows in full sun. It grows in dry soil, in heavy clay, in the narrow cracks between paving stones where almost nothing else survives. Spray it with herbicide, and it retreats for a season, then comes right back. The Anglo-Saxons called it alehoof, and the Anglo-Saxons weren't a sentimental people. They named things for exactly what those things did. Alehoof meant the plant used to flavor and preserve ale. Long before hops took over that role across Northern Europe, German records confirm brewers were using it as early as the 10th century. For hundreds of years, the bitter, herbal edge in a mug of ale wasn't hops at all. It was this small, stubborn weed. Anglo-Saxon healers also reached for it for a much harder problem. Wounds that wouldn't close, flesh that had begun to die, conditions modern medicine would later describe as necrotic. The kind of injury that resists ordinary care. They described what it seemed to do in plain Epser, almost poetic terms. The plant that drives out poison and calls back life. This plant doesn't ask you for anything. No watering, no fertilizer, no protection from frost. It needs exactly one thing from you. Stop killing it. Now, the final plant on this list works far more quietly. You've almost certainly felt it before you ever noticed it. As the sticky little hooks of cleavers cling to your jacket walking through tall grass, Gallium aparine. Most people know it only as an annoyance. Monks called it cleaverwort. In the herb gardens kept by Benedictine brothers as far back as the 12th century, where healing knowledge was carefully recorded and passed down through generations, it was used specifically for swollen glands, for the kind of quiet, internal stagnation that often shows up before anything else does. What's remarkable is how far that observation traveled. Traditional Chinese medicine independently identified the very same plant for the very same purpose. Ayurvedic practitioners in India, working in complete isolation from European monks, used it under the name Madhuparnika for swelling and stagnation in the glands. 3 traditions, 3 continents, no contact whatsoever between them. The same overlooked, sticky little weed. 12 plants, each one dismissed, sprayed, or pulled without a second thought. H1, at some point in history, treated by someone, somewhere, as worth understanding, rather than simply destroying. The plants survived everything we threw at them. What's far more fragile is the knowledge of why our ancestors valued them in the first place. So here's the question worth sitting with. We didn't lose these plants. They're still out there, right now, growing in cracks, in shade, in the corners of every yard we've tried to keep perfect. What we lost is the knowledge of why people once knelt down, picked them up, and depended on them generation after generation, across empires that never met, across continents that had no contact. People kept arriving at the same conclusion about the same plants. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern too consistent to ignore. And somewhere along the way, we decided the simplest answer was a chemical sprayer and a Saturday morning at war with our own lawn. If this changed even a little of how you see your own backyard, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more buried in plain sight than anyone tells you. Share this with someone who's still out there every weekend, pulling and spraying without a second thought. They deserve to know what they're standing on. And tell me in the comments which one of these 12 is growing in your yard right now. Next time you reach for that spray bottle, look down first.